flip to the other side. We're researching, we're writing up our thesis. How do I use copyrighted materials in the thesis itself? So this is first making sure we don't plagiarize, but it is going deeper. This is about making sure that the attribution is to the right individuals and that we've not left a single author out of that process. So before you submit your thesis or your research to a university, make sure you're probably going to be required to warrant that you have not infringed copyright, because they want to be protected from the fact if you have. So we may include copyright material in your thesis without the copyright owner's written permission if the amount you are copying is insubstantial. So a short quote or extract, no problem. We're taking half a paragraph out of somebody's research. That's not an issue. If the copyright in the work has expired, so we've gone past death plus 80 years, or the work has been licensed for public use. But regardless of whether we have to seek permission, does not exclude us from the fact that we still must attribute or reference it to the source author. Under most copyright acts, authors and creators retain the right for a few things: to always be acknowledged as the author of their work, not to have their works falsely attributed to another person or organization. So it's always very important to make sure that as we track something, we track it down to the original person who did the contribution, or we can showcase the progression of that through our attribution. And the most important one that I think becomes increasingly important in this day and age is not to have their work treated in a derogatory fashion. So either some text that is quoted out of context or images distorted or altered, including diagrams or flowcharts, etc., that they may have created. There is a defense that is called fair dealing. So copying a reasonable portion, what is fair dealing and can I use it for my thesis? Of course you can. You can copy a reasonable portion of somebody else's work in an assignment, a thesis, a project that you are submitting for assessment. But a reasonable proportion is going to be deemed to be the following: 10% or one chapter, whichever is greater, from a literary work in hard copy form. So even if we go into a library and we photocopy something, we are legally restricted to 10%. Whether we are morally restricted, that's a personal matter. We are ethically restricted, but that's where the morals come in. We have a limit of 10% of the total number of words or one chapter, whichever is greater, if it is in electronic form. So for example, a blog entry, a report, a speech, a web page, a conference paper, or a work published on CD-ROM. Again, it's what is legal versus what is ethical versus what is moral for our own use. Most of us will happily copy 3 or 4 chapters or whatever's required, or a whole book even, and I'm not going to deny that. But the rules on our being able to use that are a lot more strictly adhered to. And we can also, from a periodical, from a journal, a newspaper, or magazine, one article, unless it's the same course of study for the same research, in which we actually can go further. Now, how we choose to use them, again, it's important. You cannot rely on this provision, though, if you subsequently publish part or all of your work in either print or electronic form. This means these rules are for our private consumption. If we then make these works available through our work and are selling that or making that available even for free elsewhere, then we need to make sure that we get copyright permission from the work, because you cannot rely on fair dealing provisions for this. If you want to publish your thesis or parts of it in an academic journal, publishers will typically not be satisfied with copyright works used pursuant to fair dealing and will usually require authors to obtain permission for any third-party materials. So it's very important that if you're using it for a purpose that is outside of your thesis, that you take that time and you make that effort to actually get the copyright permissions from that. Let's switch to something a little bit different, because although we've talked about copyright in general and about using other people's, let's look very specifically about images. This is kind of a challenging one because this is not only taking on board perhaps a diagram or something that has been within someone else's research. This may be including the use of photographs, artwork, or other imagery that contributes to what we are writing about. So it's important to clarify what images you can use for your thesis, your dissertation, or first publication. And it can actually be very frustrating. Even when I come to do webinars, I want to be very cautious as to what images I can take. So if I'm using photographs, I always try to make sure they're mine, or I get them from an online open access source with unlimited use permissions from it, such as Pexels. When it comes into the academic context, I may be doing something with historical research where I'm using somebody else's photographs, or I may be doing something with artistic research where I'm using somebody else's work. So it's very important to look at how this becomes. Our basic guidelines and resources to help with questions that we have about copyright image use. Image use rules fall into two main categories. One that is copyright or restricted. Therefore, the creator controls how the work is to be used. Before you can even include a copyright work in your publication, you must get copyright permission from the copyright holder. Now, this is very likely to apply to art, to diagrams and images, or to perhaps historical photographs that haven't become part of the typical marketing world's open access, free downloadable images. The second one is we do have, thank you to the marketing world, public domain images that are works that are not subject to copyright. So these are perhaps photographers or others who have purposely set out to photograph different things that we can use. Now, they may not be protected for a number of reasons. They could have an expiration, so a very old image. They may be ineligible for a copyright because of the nature of what they are or what they talk about. Or they may have been released to the public domain by the creator. So when I come to look at some of the things that I do more from my business perspective than from an academic perspective, we use a lot of imagery. I go to pexels.com very much to get those immediately that I can use, knowing that I automatically have no conflict of interest or no challenges to the copyright there. The third category is going to be fair use, but this is determined for imagery on 4 factors, or the eligibility via 4 factors. The purpose or the character of the use of the image, the nature of the copyrighted work, the amount of work, or the amount of the work, used, and the effect on the use of the work's market value or overall market for its use. So using an image in a dissertation or a thesis under this provision actually requires a lot of research to make sure that we're not put in a conflict of interest type scenario. So always when you're looking at an image for an academic publication, be it the thesis, be it the journal article, whatever, determine what its source is, the original source, not where you found it, but determine its original source and what are the use restrictions. And then you need to go through what can I do beyond that. So let's look at from an academic perspective. Where am I going to find my public domain images? So there's a few sites that I'm just talking about briefly. And if you want any more details, I'm happy to drop you guys an email with any of this later on. Images for Academic Publishing was initiated as a partnership between Metropolitan Museum of Art and Artstore Digital Library to provide scholars with high quality images at no charge for academic publications. So a lot of other museums have also, and archives, sorry, have joined into the IAP program. And that gives you an opportunity to find a very significant database of image resources that you can use. It doesn't guarantee it's going to give you the images you need, but it may be a helping point along the way if your choice of images has some restrictions. Our Creative Commons become very important. A vehicle that really allows creators and owners to share copyright-free material with others. So we've got Wikimedia Commons, Shared Self Commons, Flickr Creative Commons, Internet Archive, Europedia, or simply through Creative Commons main portal itself. These all give us opportunities where we can get imagery that we can use without there being restriction. Now, having said that, the moment you take an image from a Creative Commons type resource, make sure that you record and maintain some sort of printed proof of where that came from, because you may still be asked to justify that there are no copyright issues with that particular image that you have. A third source is also that museums have made lots and lots of public domain images available in high resolution for everyday use, including academic use. Again, make sure you keep a record of where you got the particular image from and the fact that it was open availability. But it does depend on your research, your topic, and whether one of these particular databases or the notion of any of these particular databases would actually fit in. You know, for example, we may consider that we won't find an image that relates to what we want, but at the end of the day, it's very likely that there will be something we can use in there if we already have something in mind. So let's take a quick look at using other people's copyrights. So before you submit your thesis, and in fact, it's recommended that we do this several months in advance because we want to make sure that we're getting everything across. Have you identified all of the third-party materials comfortably before you file your dissertation? And have you done a systematic review that ensures that you can attribute those particular pieces of information, regardless whether they're image, text, etc.? And have you identified and obtained all of the necessary permissions that you need for it?